We are in the book of Deuteronomy. We'll start reading in a few moments in verse 19. This is part one of what will probably be a four-part series on observing holidays. To what extent do grace-age believers observe them? Is there justification for doing so? And so forth. Now, the first thing we want to note is that as far as holidays are concerned, we get the word from two words. We combine holy and days. So it's something more than simply a secular observance, something more than the government saying we're going to honor our presidents. It has a religious or spiritual connotation to it. Basically, and this is our second point, the concept comes to us from Israel. You can search the scriptures, and prior to the time of the dispensation of law, you will find no holy days required. Now, yes, the Sabbath day is mentioned, but you will never find where God said to man, observe it. God observed it. He rested. But up until the time where you have the nation of Israel, you basically have no legitimate holy days. But you do have Israel having holy days. First of all, they were considered legal. That means they were simply incorporated into their own constitution. The law of Moses was the constitution of Israel. Within the law of Moses, God incorporated holy days. Therefore, they were legally observed. And if you did not keep them, it was under penalty of death. We'll see that in just a little bit. Secondly, they were universally observed, which simply means every tribe did it. No one was exempt from anything but work on a holy day. And then lastly, it was given to the nation alone. There were no other nations, unless they became as Jews, that were given the concept of holy days. This is extremely important. Now, a holy day for Israel was simply a time that was set aside for the specific observance of something that God said, whether it's the Feast of Pentecost, Passover, unleavened bread, tabernacles, the Day of Atonement, the Sabbaths. You had to literally, for the most part, on all of these, stop any work. That was one of the key factors here in the holy days of Israel. No one was allowed to work, do anything. You weren't even allowed to strike a match and light a fire on a holy day, especially the Sabbaths and the other festivals that were considered Sabbaths. Now, as far as that is concerned, prior to Israel and during the time they existed in the land and during their captivities, there were illegal holy days. And we're going to look at those first. We're going to get a background on some of the illegal holy days that Israel was not allowed to observe. Now, what's important about these is that the holy days that we observe today, for the most part, are the very same things or concepts or deities that the heathen nations prior to Israel or in the land of Canaan observed. And we need only point to Easter, which is the observance of Ishtar, the deity who went down, and basically this is a common story all the way back from Semiramis all the way through to the Roman Empire. It's a common story that a deity had a son. She was a virgin born, and this son died, and she went down into the netherworld, and she rescued him in the spring of the year. And when she came up, it was much like E.T. Remember what E.T. did? He had the power to bring those flowers back to life. Well, when he came back to earth, he restored the life. And so springtime, spring of the year, so they observed Ishtar. And we get the word Easter. And so we combine Ishtar with the Christian observance of resurrection, and to me, it is thoroughly blasphemous. Thoroughly blasphemous. Verse 15, Deuteronomy 4. Take heed to yourselves, for when you came out of Egypt, you saw no manner of similitude. You didn't see an image. Observe this because you can corrupt yourselves, verse 16, and make an image or a similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, or, verse 17, the beast of the earth, winged fowl that flies through the air, creeping thing, verse 18, or fish. Now, verse 19 is the verse we want. Lest thou lift up thine eyes to heaven, and when thou seest the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the host of heaven, you be driven to worship them. Now, the word worship, and then later on serve, is the basic concept of a religious observance. They would worship the cycles of the sun. There were sun worshipers. They would have new moons. Israel had a new moon observance too, but God told them to do it in a certain way, so that was legitimate. Certain stars would come at certain times of year. In fact, basically, these particular observances were based on an agricultural economy. They needed rain, so they prayed to the rain god. They needed sun, so they observed the sun god. They needed fertility. They wanted their cattle to produce, so they observed something toward this god, many of which were in the stars. For example, our own planets. Jupiter, Venus, Mars, Mercury, Neptune, are all deities that they looked in the sky and said, hey, that's Neptune up there. I can see him. And when Neptune came seasonally came up and they saw him, they would have a religious feast or observance to him. It's wrong to worship and serve these deities, said God to the nation of Israel. They were illegal holidays. Chapter 17. Now, the idea of worshiping and serving simply means that you draw aside and you set aside a special period of time, an allotment of time, for the express purpose of paying homage to this deity. Now, what's going to happen if you do that? Verse number 2, Deuteronomy 17. If there be found among you within any of your gates any man or woman that has wrought wickedness in the sight of the Lord in transgressing his covenant. And what was his covenant? The Mosaic covenant, which included his feast days and a prohibition against illegitimate feast days. Don't do what the heathen nations do, either before you or the ones that you've driven out of the land or the ones that are existing now. Don't do like them. Be different, says God. But if you find somebody, verse 3, who has gone and served other gods and worshipped the sun, moon, host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it be told thee, here's what you do. You bring the man and woman forth, says verse 5, that have committed the wickedness, last part of the verse, you'll stone him with stones, lest you die. No illegal religious holidays. No observances that are connected in any way, shape, or form with the heathen deities or observances that have gone before. And if you find somebody doing it, in other words, if we were the nation of Israel and they were to observe Ishtar, guess where they'd go? Out to the nearest quarry. We'd all pick up rocks, chuck them at them, and get rid of the wickedness from among Israel. Now, this was a basic concept, but there's more. Chapter 18. Starting with verse 9. There it says, when you come into the land that the Lord gives you, don't learn to do after the abominations of the nations. Now, what about Ishtar or Easter? How did it get its start? Well, one way that it got its start is also the observance of Ishtar's birthday, which is around the spring of the year. They believed that the gods from the heavens sent a giant egg And it came down, shooting through the sky, bright meteor. By the way, this was not the only, the goddess Artemis in the book of Acts also had this meteor or stone or image from Jupiter fall out of the sky. And this big egg came out of the sky and hit near the Euphrates River. And when it did, it cracked open. This is a true myth. I'm relating to you a true myth. This is how it got started. This is why you look at an egg. How in the world did a bunny and an egg get together? Why in the world would the resurrection of Jesus Christ be associated with an egg? It's not. You'll not find it in the Scripture, but you will find it in the story of the origin of Ishtar. She came down and the egg cracked open and da-da, what do you have? Ishtar, hey! And then Ishtar rescues her son, and you have the spring of the year where you coordinate all of these things together. Well, what am I saying? Don't learn to do after the abomination of these nations. Now, what do our kids associate with Easter? Colored eggs. Ishtar, not the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Same thing with Christmas. Santa, not Jesus Christ. Don't learn it. Don't even let it in your house. It shouldn't be done. Why? Because it's an abomination and I'm going to curse you for it. And by the way, there's grace age curses as well. You don't escape them. There shall not be found among you anyone that makes his son or daughter pass through the fire, that uses divination. Here's our phrase, the observer of times, a charmer, familiar spirits. These things are an abomination to the Lord. Drive them out from before you. Verse 13. Be perfect, which simply means adjust to the covenant. Keep the Mosaic covenant. Keep my law. Verse 14. For these nations which thou shalt possess, hearken to the observers of time. But the Lord has not allowed you to do so. Now, here is the prohibition. We're going to turn right now to the book of Leviticus chapter 19. The book of Leviticus chapter 19. Let's see. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. I overshot the runway. Chapter 19 and verse number 26. And it's at this verse that we're going to look into the Hebrew itself. Ye shall not eat anything with blood, nor use enchantments. You shall not observe times. Now, there is a biblical prohibition here against associating the holy people of God, the distinct people of God, with those things that are practiced among the heathen nations. They worshipped beasts. What do we have in at Easter time? Ducks, bunnies. Why bunnies? Because they are known for being prolific in their sexuality, in their reproduction. Why honor that? Most of these deities were gods or goddesses of fertility. They wanted more animals. The more animals you had, the richer you were. So, simply, I'll burn this blessed candle to you. I'll have this observance. Here comes the star up in the sky. We'll make an altar. We'll do those things. We'll observe. We'll set aside the time when we see that star or when we have this season of the year. This is what we will do. And God told Israel, don't observe the times. Now the word observe is anon in the Hebrew. It is in the poel stem, P-O-E-L. It is causative or active. Don't be actively engaged in bringing about, as it were, a religious observance. It also is intensive, which indicates dedication to it. I dare say, if a pastor were to say, let's not observe Ishtar. Talk about dedication to a concept. Oh, but we've got to have these baskets full of eggs. We've got to teach our kids about chocolate bunnies and ducks, and we've got to color these things. Oh yeah, sure you do. Don't observe the time. Don't be dedicated to the concept of observing what is associated with heathen worship. Don't pay homage to it. Don't practice it. And yet that's all we do. And it's creeped into grace age circles, and it's no wonder grace believers are so weak and so pitiful. We're falling down in our ranks because we want to be like the traditional people. Why do they observe these things? Because they allegorize the scriptures. They make themselves religious Israel. And if you're religious Israel, what did actual Israel do? Have religious observances according to agricultural cycles. So they simply do this and sort of tack this on and tack Easter, and they're a combination of myth all the way back from Babylon and some of Christianity, a little bit of Jewish, and anything else they want to make up as they go along. Now it means watch for the covering or the hovering. Watch the sky. Jesus Christ said, you discern the sky and you can observe the times. If it's red in the evening, you'll say fair weather's coming. If it's red in the morning, you'll say it's going to rain today. You can observe the sky. Now that's simply an illustration of what this means. To watch the sky. To watch the seasons change. The time of rain, the time of planting, the time of growing, the time of harvest, and observe these things. And again, as it is in the Poel, it means literally to be dedicated to this thing, imperfect, on a constant basis. The incompleted action in the past. On a regular basis, you continue to do so until your death. All right, but there's one more word here, times. Amah. And it means to tap or beat regularly. And it has reference to the seasons of the year. Anybody that has studied knows that our particular solar system, our universe, is accurate to several seconds throughout the course of a year. And we get our seasons because of this. In fact, God says in the book of Genesis, He promised to Noah that after the flood, the ground would not be cursed, as it were, but until the end of time, with the exception of the tribulation, there would be the seasons of the year: spring, summer, fall, and winter. So, here's the concept. They are rites based on the seasons of the year or agricultural cycles. Now, with that, we're going to go to 2 Kings. I'm just going to allow you this so you can get these few things down. Like I said, we would have had many more, except some blessed presence was known here last night. Now, 2 Kings 21, verses 1 through 16, will give us the example of someone, Manasseh by name, who was a king of Israel who did wickedly. And we're going to show you what he did. And then we're going to begin to understand why we need to be very cautious in observing holy days. You just got to have them, do you? 2,500 years prior to the nation of Israel, there were none. 2,500 years of human history, there was not one holy day. Not one. At Israel, God's earthly national people, yes, you have many holy days, as we'll see in just a little bit. But when Israel is no longer a viable entity, are there holy days? Well, we're going to explain that from the writings of Paul. 3 times the Apostle Paul deals with the subject of days, times, months, years. Manasseh was 12 when he began to reign, verse 1. Verse 2, he did that which is evil in the sight of the Lord, after the abominations of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. Now, you see, God said, don't learn to do the abominations of the nations that were before you or that exist now in the land with you. Remember, they didn't run out, all of them. For he built again the high places of Hezekiah his father. Hezekiah was a good, godly king. He destroyed these altars. But Manasseh said, I'm going to rear them up. And again, Baal was simply a deity. They all had deities that were associated with stars and with the seasons of the year and so forth. And he made a grove. This is a Phallic cult. We've studied this before. Simply, they worshiped fertility and sex. Ahab, the king of Israel, and he worshiped all the host of heaven and served them. There's the concept of having holy days. Now, he built altars for them, the host of heaven. He put them in the courts of the house of the Lord. Now we're getting serious. It's one thing to build them again outside, but it's another thing to get what they observed outside and bring it into God's house, so that he not only corrupted the nation externally, he corrupted them spiritually. Because when they came to worship the Lord in purity, they could not do it. They could not keep the Sabbath in holiness. Why not? Because all of these altars and idols devoted to natural phenomenon out there were in the house of the Lord. Good principle. You never bring in the house of the Lord what is common, profane, or what the heathen or unbelievers do on the outside. And yet we've got churches. We've got churches in this town. You come Christmas time and they want to gather a group of kids. Rather than tell the kids about Jesus Christ, do you know who they bring in there to get a group of kids to come? Santa Claus. Unbelievable. Nasty, compromising profanity in the house of the Lord. He made his son to pass through the fire. In other words, he gave his son as a sacrifice to Molech. And observed times. Verse 7, he set a graven image of the grove in the house of the Lord, which the Lord said to David and to Solomon, I've chosen to put my name there. Verse number 9, they hearken not to the Lord. Manasseh seduced them to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord destroyed. And the Lord spake to his servants, because Manasseh has done these things and has done wickedly above all the Amorites, which were before him. See, the Amorites just simply did it with no regard to Jehovah. Manasseh did it by bringing these things into the house of Jehovah and spiting him. Therefore, he says, I'm going to verse 14, forsake the remembrance of mine inheritance and deliver them into the hands of the enemies. Concept, when you compromise, when you corrupt the worship of the true God, Jehovah God, by bringing these things in, there is a double discipline for it. All right. Now let's go, if you will, to the Sabbath. Let's go back to the book of Exodus. Chapter 31. Exodus chapter 31. The first thing we want to see is that was a sign for Israel only. That's why it's hard to get it through our minds regarding holy days. If we don't worship the Sabbath, which was the most common holy day of Israel, if we don't observe the Sabbath, why would a grace believer observe any of the other of Israel's holy days? Why would we why would we want to attach what the world is doing for these holy days and bring it into our house of the Lord and corrupt it? Well, of course, we should not. Verse 12. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel. My Sabbaths ye shall keep. Now, the Sabbath was the most common, most important, regular holy day. Every week out of 52 weeks, they had a Sabbath. Now, they had other ones, to be sure, but the Sabbath was the most important as far as regularity is concerned. This was tantamount to our, quote, first day of the week. Now, mind you, our first day of the week, this is the first day of the week, is not a holy day. There are some people who have to work on this day. And remember, the definition is you can't work on a Sabbath. Now, mind you, if you start your car and build a fire, because that's what you do, you have broken the Sabbath just to get to church. Don't let these Seventh-day Adventist people fool you. They break the law every time they start the car to go to church. They had fried eggs that morning. I guess unless they nuked it, they were breaking the law. It's a sign between me and you throughout your generations that I sanctify you. Keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy to you. Everyone that defiles it shall surely be put to death. Whosoever does any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from his people. 6 days work may be done, but the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. If you do work on the Sabbath, he'll be put to death. The children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath too. Note our word. Observe it. Here it comes, 6 days. Here comes the Sabbath. We observe it. We mark it. We make it distinct. We dedicate this time solely to the Lord and for spiritual purposes. It's a sign, verse 17, between me and you, your children forever. Now, the Sabbath was for Israel only. Point 2, all work was prohibited on the Sabbath. Exodus chapter 35. Moses gathered all the congregation, the children of Israel together. These are the words that the Lord has commanded. 6 days you'll work. Whosoever works, this is verses 1 through 3. Exodus 35:2, last part. Whosoever doth work shall be put to death. Ye shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations on the Sabbath day. That's why on Friday they had what's called the day of preparation. If they were going to eat on the Sabbath day, they had to cook their food on the day of preparation. You couldn't do any work. It was solely given over to spiritual activity. Period. All right. Quickly, let's go to Numbers 32 and 36. Numbers chapter 15, 32 through 36. Our time is about to run out here. And Numbers chapter 15 and verse 32. I just bring this in to show you the seriousness of not keeping the Sabbath day and why there is absolute confusion about this matter for grace age believers. Do we worship on the Sabbath? We do not. Do we have holy days? We do not. Where are they? Where does Paul say we have got a holy day? Where does he say we observe anything by way of a feast of Israel or any other day for that matter? Now, we're going to, before somebody gyrates themselves out of orbit, before you become a shooting star, falling star, before you say, what's that pastor doing? He's going to take away from me my eggs and my Santas. No, I'm not. But I am going to absolutely, before this study is over, make you think that when you approach a holy day, you better approach it on grace grounds. Because if you go back under the law and observe holy days as Israel observed holy days, you come under the curse of Paul himself. The Galatians were doing that. Ye observe days and months and times and years. I'm afraid of you, says Paul, lest I bestow labor on you in vain. Why? Because they were observing Passover, which is coming up, Pentecost. But these were Gentile believers. Yeah, who told you? Judaizers. They said that you had to be saved. Yeah, you believe in Christ, but You have to turn around and keep the law, religious observances, religious days, in order to keep being saved. And as soon as you become that, you're a legalist, and you come under the curse of Paul, which said to the Galatians, I'm amazed that you've left me, the gospel of grace, for another gospel which is not another of the same kind of gospel. There's grace and law. There's kingdom and church. Let's read this and quit. Verse 32, children of Israel were in the wilderness. They found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. They found him, gathered his sticks, brought him to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation. They put him in a ward, that is, in prison, because it was not declared what should be done. The Lord said to Moses, that man shall surely be put to death. Notice who's saying it. Well, Lord, what should I do? Didn't I tell you, Moses, slow bunny? Why can't you simply think Bible doctrine? If he starts a fire on the Sabbath, if he desecrates the Sabbath, put him to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones. All the congregation brought him without the camp, stoned him with stones, that he died, as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, if we're going to have holy days, we need to make them legal, and if the world doesn't observe them, then we need to go out and chuck rocks at them till they die. That's the only way to remove sin or evil from Israel. Now, of course, we don't do that. We can't do that. Why? Because we're not in grace, and America is not a theocracy.